There we go. Sorry for that little stop there. But okay. So what he found, which was really, really interesting, is that when teachers were writing themselves, and not just English teachers, there were history teachers and arts teachers and science and mathematics, but when teachers were writing themselves, and that didn't need to be public writing, it could be writing in your journal, that it really transformed how they paid attention to the kids in their classroom and how they taught writing. So he went on to found the Bay Area Writing Project, which is at University of California, Berkeley. And since then, writing projects have popped up all over the country, and we actually have international ones as well. For many, many years, the writing project, believe it or not, was federally funded. We had a line item in the budget. Unfortunately, that was cut during the Obama administration, and so now we work independently, usually through grants and support of our university, because most writing projects are housed in universities. And just kind of, there's so many ways to think about the writing project, but these are kind of six things that tend to ground us. First is this idea that writing really does have a research base and a pedagogy that can be taught. And I mean taught to us as educators, and then us teaching that pedagogy or using that pedagogy to teach the children or students in our classroom. The other really big thing is so often we think about writing as a tool just to kind of like show what you know. But what research has really shown is that writing, and we're going to hear a lot about that today, is a thinking tool. And I know for me as a professional writer, a lot of times I will work on articles, not necessarily on things that I am experts on, but things that I am learning. And through writing is where I start to understand my own thinking, recognize my gaps, and get some clarity. And this other idea that great teachers of writing write themselves, and again, it doesn't need to be public or professional writing. It can just be writing in the evenings in your journal or your day book, and that all teachers are teachers of writing. If you're mathematics, if you're social studies, if you're health and PE, and that writing practice, when we actually engage in the work that we do with our students, it influences our teaching practice. And a lot of times you can kind of think about it in terms of, I know what my younger son plays basketball, and it would be crazy that to have a basketball coach that didn't play basketball himself. But we actually see that a lot in classrooms, that sometimes as teachers, we will teach things that we don't actually engage in. And so a lot of the writing project is let's do the work alongside our children. And the other thing that's probably really the most important thing, and you're kind of meeting and getting to see again, Emily and Samantha, but that in our schools, teachers are our leaders. There's lots of research that says that the best professional development is not done by outside folks coming in, but actual teachers that are housed in that school or district. So, last thing, a little bit about some of the things that we do, and we would love for the writing project to do with you, is we put on conferences, we do webinars like we're doing today. We do lots of PD in schools and in districts that are specific with the goals that they're working towards with their faculty. And we have young authors camps and sometimes writing contests. And we're looking into working with a lot of writing projects do the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. And that might be something that you do as well. And probably the last thing I'll say, a lot of folks will say that the National Writing Project is the longest standing successful professional development that we've seen in the United States. And that's pretty cool in that teachers and educators that are involved in the writing project tend to stay in education, 98% to be exact. So that's a pretty big deal, and something we talk a lot about with administrators. And when folks go through the writing project, we think about them coming in as teachers or educators, and then while they're getting acclimated, starting to kind of do that work, They are teaching fellows. And then once they really get that level of expertise and they are ready to rock and roll and share professional development, we say, oh my gosh, now they are teaching consultants. And if you were to go out to Oregon to one of their writing projects and say, I was a teaching consultant with the writing project, then that they know what that vocabulary means and they would be excited to put you to work. But today we've got two of those fabulous teaching consultants, Emily and Samantha, and I wanted to just give you a little bit about them. Emily has like done it all. She has been a teacher, a sim professional developer, and instructional coach. And I'm really grown to appreciate the importance of routines in her classroom. And using the strategic instruction model or SIM has really changed how her students approach content that require that higher order thinking. And she wants more educators to know about these strategies, and we are going to be in the know after today, my friends. And then last but certainly not least, we have got Samantha, and Samantha too just brings this huge wealth of experience. She has been a middle and high school science teacher with extensive experience teaching English language learners and students with disabilities. She served as department chair, which we know is not an easy thing to do, and on the school leadership team. She's a national professional developer for the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning Strategic Instruction Model, and she currently is leading a school-based peer coaching team. And she also provides professional learning to teachers related to developing a school-based curriculum. So I am so excited to learn with these two amazing educators today, and I know you all are too. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to the ever fabulous and wonderful Emily and Samantha. Let's
All
do it.
right. Thank you, Dorothy. We're so excited to be here today. Um, we are just really looking forward to sharing with you guys about our strategy. So I know, and then linking it to writing. I know, just to give you a heads up, Samantha's going to share her screen and I'll kind of be monitoring and working in the chat for today's session. And one of the things we did want to ask, we're going to do a lot of interactive things. So one of the things we would like to ask for people to have, if you have paper and something to write with, right, Samantha?
Yes.
One of our activities, we're going to have you guys kind of show your thinking along the way while we're kind of working through one of our strategies. But we're really excited to be here with you guys and to share about to pry or prying open your students' thinking.
Yes. Thank you, Emily, for getting us started. I am so excited to be here today and to share this strategy with you all, and then to link it to the cognitive writing that we've been hearing about in our sessions. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
And while Samantha's working on sharing that, I am going to also post the link to our slideshow in the chat. There are going to be a lot of resources that we've linked in there that we wanted you guys to have access to. So,
Emily, is that?
yep, you look good.
Yep, look good. Okay. All right. So we are going to talk to you about TPRY today, which is a student-owned strategy. Our goal is to give you some experiences in using TPRY in several different ways. But before we get started today, we wanted you all to take a look at this. And we'd like you to look at these and jot down on your paper that you have beside you one thing that you notice and one thing that you're wondering. I'll give you guys about a minute to do that. Okay, about 10 seconds. All right, would anyone like to drop into the chat or maybe unmute one thing that they noticed about these images?
I can see that it looks like some changes are going on as the arrows progress.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, these are example visuals, tables, graphs that students interact with, specifically life science. And what we can see is that not only do they have words and sentences that they have to read, but they also have these images that they have to be able to interpret and analyze, and then be able to take that analysis and then answer a question.
Yeah, and sorry, Samantha. One of the things Chris shared in the chat was that they're not easy to read. The visuals themselves are hard to follow, which I think is one of the things we're going to be talking about today.
Yes, it is. So with that in mind, we wanted you to take a look at these. So what do you notice and wonder about these? We'll give you about a minute. Okay, about 10 seconds. All right, would anyone like to share what they were noticing about these?
I'm just wondering where the bag is. Are we talking are we talking about like this actual what we read or just the visual images?
So the problem, so the green box is representing a problem that you would give your students, and then the red box is representing something that you would give your students. I'm sorry, I probably should have explained that. So if we were to give our students the problem in the green box, we would have the things for the students to interact with. But as a student, how do we think our students approach problems like this if they're given the bag of materials and the things that they need to be able to do this?
They're gonna like try to experiment, I think. They might model it out in action and then hopefully they would like write their once they come up with a plan or as they're coming up with a plan, like write their ideas out and draw it out to figure out like kind of like make a draft of what would work and then hopefully they would, revise it and finalize it.
Yes, that's awesome. Thank you so much. So, yeah, we would want our students to be able to think about the problem, plan it out, maybe do some writing on some paper to model it, or even like model it, like act it out, or that sort of thing. And to pry is a strategy that will help our students, will scaffold our students to be able to do these complex types of problems that our science classes and our social studies classes and even our ELA classes and even math are requiring that students do.
Yeah. And I'll just add right here, like when I'm looking at the scenario on the left, this is something a lot of the kids probably have experienced. So building this model might be a little bit easier because most kids have fallen and scraped their knee or something like that, so they can relate to it. So I think this would be like a really good introduction to model building for the kids. Whereas the second one, and I know because I've worked with Sam for a long time, is science-based. And although science is not a strength of mine, I know that this would be more challenging for the kids to have to apply the learning that they're having. And so building that model would be much more of a challenge. But using this scaffolded um, student owned strategy, if you introduce it with the first one and kind of scaffold it along the way, I think they would do better with the second one.
Absolutely. And then if we go back to this slide, we see that like with these types of problems, students are developing models, they're building models, they're kind of creating their own way of explaining something that not necessarily can we see with our eyes. But with these types of problems, students are given the visual and they have to be able to analyze it and look at it and understand it and then be able to answer a question about it. So today we're hoping to show you how TPRY can be used to analyze models, tables, graphs, pictures that are given, and then also be able to show you how TPRY can be used to support model building and developing models with our students.
And this is super important because, and we'll talk about this at the end as well, but all of our standards across the state of Virginia are changing to lead to this higher order critical thinking, ultimately like leading to writing. And so knowing the difference in when to implement analyzing versus developing is going to come in really key. But it starts with knowing the strategy first. And I think that's where we're going next.
Yes, yay. So our big question is, how do we use visuals and models to explain observable and unobservable phenomena? And we use a student-owned strategy called TPRY. And it's kind of a play on words. We use TPRY to pry open visuals to predict and or explain. So T stands for title, P stands for parts, P stands for relationships, and then why is this happening? And there's a little dance that you can, with movements that you can teach your students to kind of give those kiddos that need movement with their learning. So in visuals, tables, charts, and graphs, our title is sometimes at the top, but sometimes it's at the bottom. And the parts can be anywhere. And then our relationships are always shown with arrows. And then why is this happening? So we
Especially
used,
with, I was just going to say, especially with middle schoolers. I don't know. I've been in middle school my whole career. Even eighth graders will do it and they love it. Sixth graders really latch on to anything with movement. So just encouraging them to do something silly and fun. So it helps them grasp what they're doing.
Yeah, and as a former high school teacher going to middle school, movements and that sort of thing was not really in my toolkit. So I've had to kind of get used to that, but it really does help sometimes to give them not only the visual and the strategy itself, but the parts and hand motions to go along with it. So using TPRY really helps our students because we know that the part of the brain that is required for those higher level thinking doesn't all the way form until the age of 25. So we are asking students to do this higher level thinking when their brains are not necessarily developed enough to be able to handle it. So TPRY is the student-owned strategy that chunks material for them. They see a chart or a table, and they have the strategy that they can then use to kind of pause and say, I can do this. It's not too long for me, or I don't know, and then they just skip it. Instead, they're gonna pause and they're gonna use the different parts of the strategy to work through the problem. So chunking the material, and then the orange and the red here showing us the IDK or too long didn't read. We're really trying to enable students not to fall into those traps of skipping the problem or or not even doing it.
And I'll just add, especially in science and social studies with this, I know this morning we had some of our amazing English people sharing about strategies with writing and things like that. And I think they made the comment of, oh, how nice it would be if like it was being used in other subjects. And I know as a history teacher, and I'm sure Samantha would say, as a science teacher, we get all the time the IDK or it's too long, I'm not going to read this. And so having some common strategy that kind of links what, so you kind of lessen the cognitive load for the kids is really helpful. So that, like Samantha was just saying, when you're chunking the material and then using a strategy that they can own and use in any content, whenever they see a visual, is going to be help lighten that load on them cognitively so that they can feel confident in what they're doing and learning.
Yes, and I would like to add to that too. I've seen it. I've seen it where students have come and they're like, "Didn't we do this in English or didn't we do this in social studies?" And I'm like, "Yes, yes, you did, and we're going to do it in science too." So it really just helps too with being able to, with the students getting practice with it. You know, that 21 times of a habit forming, and the more times they use it, the more times that they're going to be able to, or the easier they're going to be able to use the strategy with ease and comfort. So we wanted to make sure that we tied it to research and where it's supported. TPRY is supported by the New Classroom Instruction Network, specifically Strategy 4, which talks about strategy instruction. And TPRY is also supported by HLP 16, which also is the strategy instruction, the explicit instruction, and then telling students what to think while they're solving problems. So with that being said, if you would please, we're going to go ahead and do some experiences here with you. If you would take a moment and look at this visual, and on your paper, if you would jot down the title, the parts, the relationships, and why is this happening? Okay, about one more minute. All right, checking in on your notes. This visual does not have a title, although you could say that the sentences below the picture might be some sort of title. And I teach students that if there is no title, it's okay. They can also make up a title. The different parts of this visual are the different organisms that are labeled. So we have word labels, and we've got arrows. The relationships on this image are being shown by arrows. And then why is this happening? This is happening, and the arrows are part of the visual because we're looking at energy in an ecosystem. So with that, with your notes on TPRY, what I'd like you to do is to then now answer this question. About 30 seconds. Would anyone like to share what answer they got?
I was thinking trees and elephants. Kind of based on the visual, but then also thinking about my own background knowledge. And the arrows, of course.
Yes. So C would be the correct answer. Trees and elephants, trees being our producers and elephants being our consumer. Now, I'm going to pause for a second and talk a little bit about how this would be actually like used in the classroom. It's a little hard to showcase that virtually, but this is something that students would have their own printed copy of. And first, using the routine with students, we would do it together. We would work through the title and the parts and the relationships together, and we would mark it together. Students can have their own printed copy on paper, or I really like to have a printed copy in a sleeve, a plastic sleeve. So then students can use a dry erase marker and they can mark on their plastic sleeve without any commitments. So dry erase is so easy to, do this to, and no one would have to know that they maybe made a mistake or something. So it's low risk. And then once we worked through actually using TPRY, I usually give students a chance to talk to their neighbor about it. So they would have an opportunity to discuss with their neighbor. And then after they've discussed with their neighbor, we would go over either the answer to the question, if it's a question, or they would share a written sentence or two about the question as it pertains to the visual. So it really is, when you're first using the strategy with students, you have your anchor chart in your classroom and you refer to it and you do it together, and you slowly release some of that scaffolding so that students can use the TPRY strategy all on their own without the supports of the teacher. But you always want to, and I always give students what I call think time. So I allow them to think on their own and to, write down their thoughts before sharing with their neighbor or talking with their neighbor, or even I interacting with them. So that way they have that time to process something, complex as a visual like this. So how does this incorporate cognitive writing? I just wanted to pose the question. Did anyone have any thoughts about how cognitive writing would be influential in using this strategy to analyze a visual?
Well, I think when Dorothy answered, she actually kind of modeled how they could use cognitive writing. So I was in this morning session, so I don't know if anybody else was in there, but I know that Megan and Shannon shared about using accountable talk and giving students that understanding of a starting point of where to begin their discussions, which then lead into their ability to actually write down their thoughts and their arguments and counter arguments in that process. So by giving them a chance to analyze whatever image, and I know in social studies we do this all the time with charts and political cartoons and those types of things, and I'm sure Samantha would say the same thing about science. We need, it's no longer just being able to um, read those and know what they're saying. It's being able to take a position or take a side or explain the reasoning behind that image, that chart, that graphic. And so getting our students to a place where they can articulate their thinking is kind of what this strategy kind of leads me to want to have my students do more. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Any other thoughts? Okay, so let's think about how we could use TPRY to have students build a model. So we just used TPRY to analyze a visual or a model. Let's see how this would work, kind of working the other way around, building a model. So how does energy move through an ecosystem? And I need my students, because my standard says that students have to be able to develop a model that represents how energy moves through an ecosystem. So what we're going to do is I'm going to, in just a second, give you a slide with organisms on it. And your job is to take your piece of paper and build a model, write down a model of how energy moves through an ecosystem using all of the organisms and as many arrows as you need to. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So here are your organisms. And then I have the arrow to show that you can use as many as you need. So build a model that represents how energy flows through an ecosystem. I'll give you guys a moment to think and then write on your paper a model. Okay, about 1 more minute. Does that give everyone enough time? All right. Look at your model on your paper and check that you have all of your parts of TPRY. Do you have a title? If you don't have a title, add a title. Do you have parts to your model? Do you have relationships being shown? And does your model show how energy is moving through an ecosystem? Because that's what our question started with. All right. Would anyone like to show their model? I did one here. Anyone else brave enough to show their model?
I don't know that mine's right, but I made one. It's kind of small. And you were really challenging me because I had to look up what things eat because I don't know.
And Samantha, mine is like I've got like arrows and then I've crossed them out and then I've gone back and it made me think a lot about your suggestion to use a dry erase because that would be super helpful.
Yes. And I'm going to talk, when we finish this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the scratching out and all of that on the paper. All right. So what I'd like you to do is to use your model to explain. So using your model, here's a problem. Suddenly there is a disease present that is killing all of the corn. How does this impact the energy and living things in this ecosystem? Use your model to explain how this impacts. So all of your corn is gone because a disease is killing it. Use your model to explain how that impacts your ecosystem, it's more specifically the energy in your ecosystem. Would anyone like to share?
So if all the corn was gone in my ecosystem, I have at least two other species that would be impacted. I think it's actually three, but I don't have an arrow to that one right now. Which means those two species at least would be fighting over, if there was any corn, a little bit of food. So then their energy or ability to reproduce or things like that would be cut because they don't have enough energy to continue to live. So it doesn't just impact the corn, it impacts deer, squirrels, whatever else eats the corn are then impacted, which then if the deer are gone, then the cougar eat the deer, so then the cougar doesn't have enough deer to eat. So it really impacts the whole ecosystem, not just the corn.
Right, the whole system.
And building off of what Emily said, it made me think too that like I did my model and now that I'm having to apply the model to an actual situation, I'm noticing flaws and disconnects in my model. So I'm trying to figure it out, but then your second question, but then I'm revising my model, which I think is kind of cool too.
I think that's awesome. And I think it's something that revising models is something that students struggle with, because I don't know about you all, but my students always want to have it perfect the first time, and they want it correct the first time. And they're real hesitant to make a mistake. So I actually encourage my students to use pencil in my classroom if it's available, but I also encourage them to cross things out. And I say it's okay that you cross this out and make an adjustment, because that's how we're learning, or that's how we learn, is by making mistakes and crossing out and revising models. That's part of building a model, because it may not be correct the first time, and that's okay.
Yeah, and we're going to look at a social studies example in a minute, and that what I explain to the kids in the same manner is just that as we gather more information about what we're learning, your model should change, because we're talking about systems and things that continue to develop as you gain more information. You can't possibly just be introduced to a topic and expect to know all of it. You have to continue to build on it and revise and edit as you get that additional information.
Absolutely. So I wanted to share with you all, this was an example of building a model, developing a model using TPRY. But in my classroom, when I do this, students get a bag of cards, and they don't work alone. They work in groups. So they have the cards, and then they have the arrows. And then at their tables, they work and sort these cards out. And as they're working, the teacher is walking around and asking questions. So they're able to revise their model by the questions that the teacher is asking with the cards. And then once they're confident that their model is how they want it to be, then I move them to writing it on paper. And then they use their paper model to then answer a question or explain a problem that I give them. So that's just one way. It could easily be an individual student thing like we just did as well, but I also use it as a collaborative activity. And so if we're thinking about cognitive writing again, and using TPRY to develop and build models, students have opportunities to think about their model. They have opportunities to use their model, but then they're also writing their thoughts down on their paper. And then I didn't do this today, but sometimes I have my students write sentences, 1 or 2 sentences that describes their model. And you can use either them writing sentences, or you could scaffold and give them sentence starters to use. Any other thoughts?
I was just going to add it also leads to things, if they've written out their model and things like that, they lead to great discussions, or they can be used in different sorts of, whether you want to do debate, Socratic seminar, things like that, where they come to the table and are discussing their learning. They're having to think about their thinking, and then I know this morning it was mentioned using like claims to help them write. And so I know that's one of the things I've had them do before, is kind of use their models for their evidence, and then use that to help with their explanation. And especially in science and social studies, writing gets a little overwhelming, because I tell my English friends all the time, like, I know how to write, but it's really hard to teach it. And I give them a lot of kudos because they put in a lot of strategies. But I think having your other subjects partner with what English is doing to lighten that load, and giving the kids strategies like claims, or like tree, and having them articulate what they're learning by just writing a simple paragraph, using those strategies that they're using in English in your social studies and math and science. It just helps lighten that load on the kids, and it gives them that familiarity so they can dig deeper into our content. I know I say all the time, like social studies is the application of your English skills. And so, so we need that ability to just work together and so that our students can continue to be successful.
100% agree. All right, you guys ready for a social studies example?
All right, so I'm going to just walk you through TPRY on this one. So what I would like you to do, if you're able to, you can just type your answers in the chat or unmute and say them. But I want everybody to take a look at this graphic. Ignore the questions on the side. We're actually not going to use those today. But is there a title? Yes or no? No. So Samantha mentioned earlier, if we're doing this with our students, and it doesn't have a title, we will often have them come up with a title. So let's take a look at what's in, let's look at the other parts of TPRY, and then we're going to circle back to title and see if we can make one up. Okay, so after we look for a title, we said, okay, no title. What are the parts in this image? So what are some of the things that you see that are the parts? You can either type in the chat or unmute and share them. All right, we've got households, businesses. Do we see anything else? Goods, services, money. Yep. Payments, labor or workforce. Great. Okay. Are there arrows? Yes or no? Yeah. Yeah, there are arrows. Okay. So we've got no title. We have all of these different parts. What do we think the relationship is showing? In one or two words. Doesn't have to be long. Like if we look at this, at the business and we follow the arrow up and goods and services. So we know businesses make goods and services, right? And if we continue to follow that arrow from goods and services, that goes to households. So that means people like us get goods and services. Everybody agrees with that, right? So would you agree that this model is or this image is kind of showing the flow of things maybe in our economy? Good, because that's what it's doing. It is showing that. I saw a couple of nods of heads, so I was like, okay, good. So we've got no title. We've got different parts that are kind of showing the flow of how things are moving. So why would this be happening, or what might this be showing? I'll give you a hint. Do the arrows go in the same direction? No, Samantha's shaking her head no. So this is different from Samantha's example because this has arrows that go in opposite directions. So how does that show something, a different type of relationship? What kind of relationship is actually happening in this if arrows go both ways?
guess it's more kind of like a reciprocal relationship, like a back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this whole image is showing the give and the take in our economy. And how it, if you also look at it, it's continually flowing. Like if you follow the arrows, they actually move in a circle-ish, right? They kind of move in a circle. So they're continually moving. It never stops. So we saw there was no title. We've looked at all of the parts. We found that there's some relationships, give and take. And we've kind of explained why, right? So I want us to circle back to that title. If we had to give this visual a short title, what might you give it? I'll give you another hint. If you read question number 1, it might be the answer to question number 1. Might give you a title. Means you have to know some economic vocabulary. Yeah. Samantha's drawing a circle. Yeah, it's
Is
circular.
it circular flow?
Yeah, it's circular flow. So this visual is showing one of our major concepts in our civics and economics curriculum. And so it's one where the students actually have to develop it on their own, but this would be the starting point for me. So before I have them develop or create their own model, I would start with analyzing one and seeing that there are many parts in this model. Now I'm going to pose another question, because before I have them develop their own, we would do some learning about circular flow and kind of examine all of the parts. But there's actually one very important piece missing from this model. Does anybody want to take a guess of what is missing, as far as, and I'll help you out. It would be considered one of the outside pieces of our circle. So right now we know we have households and we know we have businesses. What is the other major piece in our economy that impacts circular flow? Yes, Samantha?
Is it government?
It is government. Um, so um, in our 8th grade social studies, or 7th grade, some people do it in 7th grade, civics and economics, it's both a government and economics class. So it starts, when we get into this concept, you're starting to pull all of the pieces together of what is the role of government, what is your role as a citizen, and then what is happening in the economy with our businesses. And so using this, using TPRY to help analyze these models, we get students to start thinking deeper about these concepts. And then I would lean them into probably using TRY to explain their understanding of this model at the end. So TRY is a writing strategy for them to be able to explain what's happening in our economic system. Does that kind of make sense? The other thing, so, and we'll touch on this maybe again, I can't remember where we put it in our slides. But I always do a lot of an analyzing of images in my classroom, but because developing takes longer. So think about that. I can go through TPRY very quickly. If I do this, if I set up this strategy, which I do in my first 20 days of school, which for social studies and science, that's the whole first quarter. So just ignore. We're going to do it the whole first quarter. And we're going to practice analyzing. By the time the first quarter ends, my kids are really good at analyzing, and now I have to be very strategic in what they can develop their own model within. And I have to know my content, but also know what like is the best like for the kids to really grasp what we're learning. Because developing is not something that really happens overnight. It's something that takes time. And so I teach economics at the end of the year. So by the time we analyze this, similar to what Samantha does, I also have them develop their own. I know that the expectation in Virginia is that they will have to do this drag and drop and put the arrows in the correct order, correct direction. Like direction even matters. So understanding how that process works, and then being able to explain their thinking is huge. And for me, it starts with that learner-owned strategy of TPRY. If they can analyze it, then they can use the same strategy to then develop their own, which is actually the expectation of the standard. But I can't have them develop everything. I have to be really careful and strategic about what I have them develop. So I pick core elements in our curriculum that they would actually develop. And I know Samantha will talk about that too with science. You can't develop everything. You have to pick the most important ones where it's really going to be most valuable for them to develop. But that doesn't mean that they can't write a short little bit to explain their thinking on each of them. If that makes
Yeah. Yep.
So I think next we're going to talk a little bit about English. I mentioned before I'm not an English teacher, but I have lots of really good English friends, and they can chime in if they want because I know they're here.
Well,
But if you were in their session this morning, Megan and Shannon shared about lots of strategies that they use that lead to their cognitive writing skills. And one of them is when they're doing nonfiction reading. And so when they do nonfiction, they use thieves. And I've actually started using this one. They also mentioned text annotation, which I tend to use a little bit more. But I love thieves as well because history and science are all nonfiction. So anything we give our students is using this strategy. And as a former grad student for history, I'll just let you know, thieves was my best friend in grad school because when you have to read a book a week for every class, it's kind of impossible to really actually read all of them when you have like 4 full books to read in a week. So learning this strategy is really important. And so what it does is you're going to look for the title, you're going to look at the headings, you're going to then read the introduction. Most of what you're reading in nonfiction tells you so much information just in that introduction. Then you're going to go through the first sentence of every paragraph just to kind of grasp, okay, what concept are they elaborating on? What other additional details are they giving? And then visuals and vocabulary. I am going to pause on that one because when you stop right there, they should be using TPRY.
right, which I love using thieves in science when we're looking at nonfiction articles or passages, because almost all of them have charts, tables, graphs, and that's the visuals and vocabulary. So they get their vocabulary and they get their visuals. And when they get their visuals or get to the visuals, you pause and you say, okay, class, what do we use? What is our strategy? We've come to a chart or we've come to a graph, and then they say TPRY. And so they use their title, their parts, and their relationships to analyze that that visual that's in the nonfiction text.
Yeah, and I always like to tell this story because it happens I've been teaching civics for 14 years, and this happens every time I do this activity. But when I'm teaching political parties, I have them read an article about the background to political parties, and I have them, go through thieves and well, actually, have them do text annotations. So this is where I'm like, okay, I need to use thieves more. So when they're using their text annotation, they're reading the article, and then I have them split into two sides, and they have to compete to show the different information that they get on the political parties. Guess what? None of them look at the
The
picture,
visual.
the visual. And so the number one thing they miss about political parties is their symbol or their color, because they actually didn't look at the picture. So when I'm trying to teach that basic, I always use that as like a starting point for me, to kind of introduce thieves, because I want them to see that in social studies and science, especially, everything they're seeing matters when they're reading. So it's not just the text, it is the images, it is the political cartoons, it is the tables, the charts, the graphs, because there's so much information that's in that. And so making sure that they're using TPRY on that visuals and vocabulary is super important and helpful. But then they would continue with their strategy, looking at the ending, and then, of course, going into so what, why is this important? But these, again, you can see even from this strategy that when they walk away from this text, they can take away the meaning of what's kind of happening. So, did my English people have anything to add? Did we? Checking. We're probably good.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I wanted to build on what Emily was talking about. How do we know when to use TPRY to develop or build models in our classroom? What kind of guides us in making those decisions? Because like Emily said, it does take a long time to have your students do that difficult work, and it's higher level thinking, higher order thinking work. But it's guided by our instructional guides. So in science, it's the leaves. The leaf strands are in our essential knowledge and practices, and the leaf strands are those standards that incorporate the SEPs, the science and engineering practices. And anytime that you see a leaf and it says develop a model or interpret a model, construct a food web, you can see the vertical alignment here from grade 4 to life science to biology. They're all focused on a food web, but in 4th grade, they're constructing a food web. In life science, 7th grade, they're developing or interpreting a model of a food web. And then when they get to biology, they're still interpreting that flow of energy between trophic levels, which is still a food web in an ecosystem. So in science, what guides us to develop models with students are those leaf strands.
Mm-hmm. And in social studies, so our standards actually changed this year and we'll be switching. So we're used to seeing them listed out like this, where it might say, these are the application or the skills that we need our kids to understand. And so when we're trying to look for things that they have to analyze versus develop, we might look at I have them highlighted, developing questions or integrating evidence to construct and analyze, determining and explaining cause and effect, or developing products that reflect their understanding of research. We're used to seeing it this way, but it doesn't look this way anymore. So we have new instructional guides, which I think everybody in Virginia is still scrounging to look through, because they just came out in April. So Samantha will turn the page and I'll give you or turn the slide and I'll give you a quick example of one. So this is what the new instructional guides look like. So they come with whatever the standard is, and then it gives you their ideals and practices. And then one of the unique things about the new standards is that they give you skills in practice. So you can click the next part. Samantha. We're going to focus on skills and practice. And so sometimes they blend over to another page because they've given lots of information. And if you click one more time, Samantha, if you look right here where this kind of star blob popped up, it says create a chart to organize, create a chart to organize information to explain federal and state court systems, including the courts, jurisdiction, and members involved. So when you start looking at that, at least as a social studies teacher, I go, okay, they need to be able to create a model of the federal court system, all of the courts, what they do, and all of the people, and the state court system, all of the courts, what they do, and the people, and how they work together. So this would actually be one of the ones that I would focus on having them develop, because it intentionally says that they need to be able to create this one on their own. And for if you've had any interaction with social studies, this would be a new expectation for our students. So the rigor has definitely increased. In the past, I may have only had my kids co-construct all of this, but I've never focused on they need to develop it on their own. But it's already in my thinking for this next year that this is a switch that we have to make. And there are a couple of things that I've noticed that are like that. And so for me, I try and pick one thing every unit. So if I teach my students 4 or 5 units, 5 units every year, each unit, they would develop one thing. So we can't develop everything, but in this unit that I would be teaching about the court system, this would be the focus on developing for them. We would analyze a bunch of images, political cartoons, graphics, charts along the way, but this would be the one that we would focus on. When I teach economics, the example I gave earlier of circular flow is the one that they would develop. We would analyze tons of charts about the economy and flow of money and roles that the government plays, but the one that they have to develop themselves is the actual circular flow. I can't take the time in my classroom, and I'll just say that because I teach my kids every other day, so I don't even have them every day. So I have to be very strategic in what I choose that they actually focus on developing. So I try to pick one thing every topic or unit that I'm teaching that they develop, and then we analyze everything else. But we use TPRY no matter whether we're analyzing or developing. We use the same learner strategy. Are there any questions about that or comments? I think we're good in the chat, Samantha.
We're good?
Mhm.
Okay.
So that was kind of what we wanted to share with you guys today about TPRY, and we wanted to give you guys our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us. Both of us are part of the Central Virginia SIM Network, and we coach and partner with schools and run PD. We hold our own annual conference, which next year will be at Longwood. We're very excited because of our partner. And so with the writing project. And so we're excited to be able to do that next summer. We don't have a date set, but if you would like to stay connected with us, continue to learn about more instructional strategies and writing in the classroom, we would love to have you guys reach out. We do a newsletter every so often to kind of give you all of that information. The QR code on the slide is the link to the slideshow, which I can put in the chat again, I think. Maybe. Might have to copy it again. But we're just grateful for the opportunity to share with you guys today. Dorothy, did you have anything else to wrap us up?
I just wanted to thank you. Like, that was fantastic, Emily and Sam. I took pages and pages and pages of notes. And thank you for your slideshow and your contact information. And I know as part of the Southside Virginia Writing Project and teaching consultants, we would all love to come support your schools. And we do that work across the content area. So please reach out to me, reach out to Samantha, reach out to Emily, and we'll get you with the right person. Fantastic. Are there any final questions for our very fabulous presenters? Okay, well, beautiful. We have recorded this session, so I will be uploading it into our YouTube channel as well, and I'll send an email with all that info. But thank you for coming, and I know some of us like start back to school Monday or the next week, so have a great start to the school year as well. And keep writing. That's important, right? Because my shirt, if you can see, says writing still matters. So there you go. All right, everyone. Have a great day.